Hey guys, it's Maizu, and today I wanted to share my art process for this Pinkie Pie art piece I recently drew. Something about me is that I almost never draw detailed backgrounds, and most of the time, I tend to use the draw outside the canvas trick to make my illustrations more interesting. While it does look cool, I felt like my art was becoming stagnant because of how I've been avoiding backgrounds. So for this piece, I decided that it was time to face it head on and actually start practicing backgrounds, and a little bit of perspective too. I'm currently in the process of drawing the main 6 in my style, which is why I chose to draw Pinkie for this piece, especially since it's really easy to imagine what setting she'd be in. I really like Pinkie. She, Fluttershy, and Rarity are my current faves from the main 6. She's just so bubbly, full of energy, has a sweet tooth, and best of all, she's pink. Of course I'd love her. Though Fluttershy is still my #1 favorite, Pinkie Pie has a very special place in my heart along with Rarity. For the background, I already envisioned her in Sugar Cube Corner. I wanted to draw one-point perspective because I felt it was the easiest to execute as someone practicing perspective. Something that personally helped me design the background is to imagine it as a character. My thought process when adding props involved continuously asking myself, what would a bakery kitchen have? What is its story? What is its vibe, emotions, etc.? And how do I tell the audience what kind of place this is? It's a very similar thought process for when I design characters, except instead of a character, I think about the setting. Shifting my perspective of backgrounds this way has significantly helped me when deciding how to design the background. Like, okay, it's a bakery kitchen. Maybe you'd see a bowl full of batter because the character, Pinkie, was baking. And if you're baking cupcakes, of course you'd need some icing and perhaps some cherries. You get the point. It's all about communicating to the viewer what kind of place the setting is. Granted, I did have a reference of Sugar Cube Corner on the side, but I'm the type of artist to just use it as a general outline instead of something I have to 100% follow, because I still want to have creative freedom over the background. As for character position, I wanted to make her interact with the background so that it wouldn't look like I just slapped the character on the background and called it a day. My thought process for designing Pinkie is similar to the one I followed when designing the background. Who is the character? What is their vibe? And how do I communicate it to the viewer what type of character this is? Pinkie is famously known for her energetic and bubbly attitude. I initially tried giving her a more energetic pose, but then I realized the overall composition leaned too heavy to the upper left. So to balance it out, I decided to draw her leaning against the countertop. I think this pose still works because it shows how relaxed and at home she feels when she's in Sugar Cube Corner. Anyways, I still wanted to keep her bubbly personality somewhere in the design, so I gave her a playful expression and 3 balloons colored after her cutie mark tied to her tail. In this version, I imagine the helium within these balloons is enough to boost her jumping power, which is how she'd be able to jump from place to place without ever getting tired. Maybe the chaos magic is a factor too, but shh. Usually, the sketching/planning process takes the longest next to rendering for me, because this stage is what determines the entire vibe of the piece. Do not underestimate composition. In my opinion, that is the factor that carries every artwork, along with maximizing the usage of color theory. Once the initial sketch has been finalized, I add another layer on top and retrace it to make it cleaner. This is technically line art, but I like to think of it as a clean sketch because I tend to realign important details after I'm done rendering. When it came to coloring and rendering, I figured it would be better to start with the background first, so that I could render the character to blend with the background later on. I wanted the primary light source to come from the outside through the saloon doors, and so I added the shadows accordingly. I didn't put as much effort into rendering the background as I would with the character, because while I have emphasized that the background is very important, it is not the primary focal point of the artwork. It was Pinkie Pie. By not putting as many hours into rendering the background, I am able to save a lot of time and energy, which I use in rendering the focal character of the piece. Before going straight into rendering, I like to prep my sketches by establishing where the light hits, where the shadows cast, and which areas I want to look more visually interesting, and airbrush accordingly. I add a multiply layer on top of the base color and erase where the light would hit. Afterwards, I add an overlay layer and airbrush on the lighter areas to emphasize the light. To make the lighting softer, I add a soft light layer and airbrush over the lighter areas once again. At this point, I wanted to make the colors more interesting, so I color picked from the base colors and began to airbrush over the parts I wanted to accentuate on an overlay layer. I don't always use the exact base color. Sometimes I use a more saturated version so that it would look more visually interesting. It really boils down to personal preference. Throughout the process, I adjust the colors using tone curves until I am satisfied with the colors. And with that, we're ready to render. I group all the layers into a folder, duplicate it, then flatten it so I can render. I create a new layer above the line art and render from there. The way I render is I refine some details by adding more shadows and colors on areas I want to emphasize. While rendering, I always have a reference on the side that can help guide me with placing shadows, bounce light, and such. You can never go wrong with having a reference. I'm not sure what else to say because my entire render process is really just me adding details until I'm satisfied, and most of the details I add are based on what I did during the character render prep stage. Once I'm satisfied with the rendering, I redraw the liner to areas I want to give more form to. Once I'm done rendering, I merge all the layers and add some screen tones to further emphasize the subject. I play around with the effects, airbrush some colors to make Pinkie stand out while also blending with the background, and we're done! Hope you guys enjoyed watching the art process. This is my first ever art process video and I really had fun making it. I hope you guys were able to learn something from me, or at the very least, enjoyed seeing the art piece come to life. Subscribe for more content like this, and with that, I'm out. Bye honey bunches!